Hey, Docker.
We have Chris Huntington here to talk about
Huh?
Have you ever, so usually when I do these introductions, so Docker's all about containers, right?
Yeah.
So if we put Chris Huntington in a Docker container,
Yeah.
what would we have?
I think that might be the answer. If we put me in a Docker container, you'd probably have a lot of vulnerabilities because I got a lot of learning yet to do.
Okay. Okay, Chris.
Does that make sense?
Tell us all about Docker.
Hi, guys. So this kind of started off for me with a client that wanted to start doing a little bit more on the DevOps side and had read an article on CIO or one of those things that said Docker was the way to go. But they also had a pretty significant breach, like a big reportable breach, and wanted to figure out if we were going to be able to secure instances for them. So what this kind of started with is, hey, what is it secure? And then how do we make it secure if it's not? So that's where we started off. Just a little bit of background about me. I'm a security solution architect for a company called Nexigen in Newport, Kentucky. We are a security company, so I know Mike loves us very, very much. We also do some managed services and other things, but nothing interesting apart from the security side. Technology enthusiast and security evangelist since 2004. I got started working on firewalls in a state government organization. And you can imagine how exciting that was for about 4 years of my life. And I've got various security and infrastructure certifications. So the first thing, how many people actually are running Docker at all? 1, 2, 3. Okay. How many people know what Docker does? This is way more than the last time I did this, which is awesome. But this is the best image I've ever found for explaining Docker. But this took me about 2 weeks to remember how to say, but this is a shipping ships. I think I got it right this time too. So basically, yes, Docker would be the big sinky boat at the bottom. And all of your applications would be in those other containers, those other ships, and we can pick those up, move them around, do whatever we want. Couldn't find a really good container one, but it's very similar. It's based on shipping containers in the shipping industry. So from that perspective, it really does kind of analog well to a lot of those different analogies. So we will say a little bit more about Docker. Docker is a tool that can package an application and its dependencies in a virtual container that can run on any Linux server. Any Linux server is a big one to remember there. This helps enable flexibility and portability on where the application can run, whether on-prem, public cloud, private cloud, bare metal, etc. This is a quote that I like to read. That's the only time I'm going to read off the deck. I promise, maybe. But that's kind of a real basic rundown, and that's actually the article that started this entire journey for me. It's basically a containerized application hosting platform. What that means is instead of building VMs and shipping code between VMs and doing all the different things that we do with VMs, I build a container with all of the dependencies for an application, and I take that container throughout the SDLC, or if you're Agile, throughout the life cycle of that build of code. All right, so I build it once and ship it from dev to QA to production. That's really kind of what we need to. That's the fundamental difference between shipping code to VMs and shipping code in Docker. It really does allow, there's a lot of tools that allow very good communication in DevOps teams, right? Of what code exists where, what stage it's in, and where the flaws are. So it really is a phenomenal tool for DevOps organizations. And for a while there, it was kind of a nightmare for security organizations. But it allows us to deploy and destroy containers with incredible speed. Whereas it was a quite laborious process to ship code into production, this is a little bit easier for us to kind of build stuff, ship it, and then continually ship without having too many production issues. It was released as an open source platform March of 2013. Version 0.9 added the libcontainer library. Basically, libcontainer said all those KVM features that are built into Linux, You can directly talk to those KVM features now, so we no longer need this convoluted way of getting through the kernel into the RAM and CPU resources. The current drive for Docker is to not just be Linux. They want to run on any kind of operating system that you might want to run. So it's kind of cool that you might be able to at some point dev in Linux and ship to Windows, or the opposite way, or whatever you want to do. That's really what they're focused on getting to. Now, what does that mean for us? Well, that means for us that now we've got a bigger footprint to secure on the bottom end of all of this infrastructure. So what isn't Docker is a very good thing to know. Docker is not a virtualization technology. Right? We're not creating VMs. We're not building instances of a full Linux instance every time we do this, right? It's not built to be inherently secure, although with 1.10 that just got released last month now, it's March now, it's gotten a lot better. It's not a virtual sandbox, although it does behave similarly to a lot of them. It's not meant to be its own build. It's meant to be just a container for that application. And it's not a panacea for application hosting. It's not okay, well, Docker's the new thing. It's not the VMware of 25 or of 15 years ago, right? It's not meant to be what a lot of people are trying to force it to be. It does work now, again, through libcontainer, and it basically directly accesses the Linux kernel through that libcontainer library, which was in 1.9 and has gotten a lot better in 1.10. I'm getting through this as quickly as I can so I can get into the security program a little bit more. If anybody wants me to stop in a specific place, go ahead, raise your hand, and I'll stop and give a little bit more detail. How does Docker work? We can span multiple physical hosts with a Docker instance, which is kind of cool. So you got a lot of servers, and you need to run specific dependencies on different servers for resources or for however you want to containerize this application. You can span one application across multiple servers in a single Docker instance, which is something that differs very, very drastically from the old VMware mentality that we had, or the Hyper-V mentality, or however you were virtualizing. Limits can be placed on resources, so one container doesn't basically DOS your entire server. That is something that I've seen attempted to be exploited several times, and I have not seen a successful one of it yet. Each container does have separate network interfaces, a complete TCP/IP stack that's built per container. And the namespaces feature gives really, really good isolation from other containers. Until 1.10, it gave really bad isolation from the base server, right? So that was one of the things that we've now got as a security benefit is user namespaces came out as part of this, and we'll get to that in a minute. But each version of the application runs in a container. All containers have a stack. Containers only contain dependencies. So now I don't have to look at all of the dependencies that are inherent on a server for everything that I'm running on there. All I have is the application-specific ones. It's created at the beginning of the development process, shipped from dev to QA, and then to production. And then once we ship another version of the code, in theory, we destroy that first container, right? So we basically get those kernel-level controls. Namespaces creates a separate file system and process stack. Containers only contain the dependencies, and control groups allocate resources, preventing one container from DOSing the whole cluster. I did want to repeat that one just because those are fundamental parts of what we are trying to get out of security in Docker. The user namespaces deserves its own slide. So how many people have upgraded to 1.10? No? Okay, user namespaces is in 1.10 that just came out last month. And basically this is a final way of stopping a root user in the container from becoming a root user in the actual host server, right? So until 1.10, we just had the namespaces feature. We didn't have each container completely isolated from the host OS. This is what this does for us. It maps a root GUID in a container to a non-root GUID on the actual host server, which is a big, big deal. This was the biggest way of escaping the jails put in by Docker, and is now finally being taken care of. There are some future enhancements coming around multi-tenancy and a few other things that will allow us to do custom user namespaces as well that will further help with things like AWS hosting and certain other things that are coming along really nicely. Some concerns, though, is the shared kernel architecture. Right? It's not designed really with security in mind. Okay? Everything is sharing a kernel and a base image. So I've still got to keep an eye on everything in my network and make sure that I'm doing good vulnerability management on both my containers and my host machines with an eye towards the privilege escalation issues that we might see in Docker. The other one, the Docker daemon runs as root, which does also potentially allow for some privilege escalation. But the biggest one for me, and I'm going to show a graph on the next slide here, is in the Docker hub, which is kind of a GitHub for Docker instances, more than 30% of the containers in the hub contained serious security vulnerabilities right out of the gate, right? 30%, and I'm talking CVSSs of 7 or higher was categorized as serious. That's really, really bad, right? So I saw this graph and looked at it, and these are even tagged latest. 23% had high priority patches available, and 47% had high or medium priority patches available for the instances that were marked as latest, which basically meant that when I saw that slide for my customer, they saw that. And kind of for good reason, because if I'm going to tell my DevOps team that Docker is the way to go, and we're going to build things out, they're going to start grabbing containers from the marketplace, and because they're open source, a lot of them are going to consider those as secure, right? Are they secure? Well, we've got some pretty significant numbers that say no, they're not secure at all. So yeah, that's kind of what we saw there, and started moving on a little bit more from there. So they asked me, how can we add security to the process? Okay, and we basically put in a slightly different type of vulnerability management system than you normally would do with just VMs and shipping code statically. What happens here is I end up, instead of having a known set of servers that I have to scan, that I have to make sure that I'm keeping secure, I'm going to end up with this sprawl. Okay, so now I've got three different TCP IP stacks in each of these containers, because I've got one sitting in dev. I may have multiple revisions built in dev. I may have multiple containers that they tried built in dev. And I may have multiple containers in QA. And sometimes I've seen multiple containers deployed in production because somebody didn't do their job and destroy the last container. Right? So we did this discover phase. And then we started with an analyze phase and figure out, hey, are we even ready for this? Right? Then it started deploying, and then we built in a process to audit regularly so that we were keeping an eye on what was going on. So I based a lot of this off Bill Semp's talk from DerbyCon, the care and feeding for developers. Did anybody see that one? Remember that one? Yeah, that was really good, and I liked some of the things about working within a schedule with DevOps and understanding that they work on a cyclical basis. Whereas us security guys want to run around and say, I got to patch it now, right? Because we're trying to integrate a little bit better with their dev team, who is already overworked on 2-week sprints, right? So they were moving really fast because they had some broken code deployed. We wanted to integrate a little bit better with their dev team to say, all right, we're going to give you a cookie cutter approach to this, and you're going to be allowed to kind of lather, rinse, repeat, and move on, and do this as much as you can in those 2-week sprints so that you can ship good code and we can stay secure, right? 'Cause security had become an afterthought. So the discover phase is, let's decide whether or not we're ready. The development processes have to be mature. Your teams have to communicate exceptionally well in a dev cycle in order for this to work. If you've got bad communication or bad management, Docker's not the place to be, because you're going to end up with 500 containers with 500 different stacks, and you're going to end up with a lot of resource contention and some vulnerabilities that you didn't even remember. You have to have good fallback options, right? So don't buy this big cluster of Docker servers or build them as Docker servers and say, all right, we're going full bore. There is no way that we're not going back. Make sure that you have a way of going back, because we have to make sure that we have applications that run without root privileges, right? We want to get that from a perspective of maintaining that segmentation between my container and my host server and my application. Okay. The other thing we have to look at is, are our apps ready? Okay. Do we have a defined process for shipping code already in place? If I don't, Docker's going to fail. Okay. And do I rely on relics when I ship code? Right. That's a big problem that I've heard a lot of with the dev staff is, yeah, we deploy stuff and then we go and upgrade, I go and upgrade OpenSSL, and I find out that I had some kind of relic that was in there that shut the application down, right? When you're shipping Docker containers, relics, if you rely on relics for making sure your application stays stable, you're not ready for Docker yet. Or you may not just be right for Docker. We can put it that way, right? So that's the kind of the discover. Are we ready for this? Okay. Then we go ahead and move to the analyze phase, which is, all right, what's going to reside in Docker instances? Okay, I can tell you that databases, not a good thing to ship in Docker, right? Not at all. How secure are the jails that I have in place in my actual applications, right? Do I have the potential for lateral movement built into my applications because of a functionality type deal? Do I have that? If I do, I probably want to make sure that I have something that's got a little bit more availability for those internal segmentation firewalls that a lot of companies are putting into place right now that doesn't necessarily work all that well with Docker. Will they require SSH, FTP, or any type of terminal access? All right, if I'm giving terminal or root, not even non-root terminal access to a server, until user namespaces, this was a really, really big deal. I still, because of the shared kernel architecture, don't know that I would allow any kind of FTP access, and I see it a lot where companies say, all right, well, I'm going to go ahead and dump this kind of stuff into FTP, and you can pull it, and that's their API, right? Bad news. Really bad news on Docker. Or SSH. I need to be able to run these commands. I need to be able to run batch commands. I had a client about 2 years ago that allowed batch commands to be run via SSH in their production environment. Really bad news. Really, really bad news if you're running Docker. Okay. Will an existing audited container satisfy the requirements that I have? So what we decided to do is say, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to build a Docker environment for my security team. This is where we got started, and I started pulling down containers and vulnerability scanning them, standing them up, scanning them, stand up, scan them, and then got to the point where I defined a set of containers that I'd audited that I said, okay, this container is now good for 2 weeks or 4 weeks. And knowing what your dev team is doing sprint-wise, or knowing what their life cycle looks like, kind of gives you an idea of how long you should be auditing these containers with a life cycle of, right? And I can say, all right, this container from the Docker Hub is allowed through March 31st, right? And make sure that we're ready to destroy that container as of March 30th, okay? If I have a container that's already audited for that application, that means it's probably a decent candidate for going ahead and pushing forward with that. If I have to start building these containers and patching them and doing a lot of stuff, it's not going to keep up with the kind of speed that our team needed to have in order to move forward with shipping code. Okay? So for them, they need to be able to grab a container, start building, and ship it. Make sense? Mm-hmm.
then you shouldn't be running production.
Yeah, that's a valid point. The problem right now is, for them, they can get the resources if they can find them.
Because, well, I mean, part of that too is all that should be part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
So every time a change is made in the container, it needs to go through test QA, that whole process.
Right. Right. Yep. What we tried to do here was allow that, and I do want to be completely clear that these applications we were shipping were internally facing only. Okay, so they were being pushed out to the retail stores across the country for this particular client. So I had pretty good handle on what kind of clients would be accessing it and the security around the clients that were already going to be having access to these applications. We were definitely trying to push something that would be more efficient for the DevOps team to be able to ship code in a quick manner so that we could get over the hump of having some serious issues with stability in the actual application. So that's where the auditing the containers that were kind of pre-existing really helped out in the agility that the team was able to get with working with them. So we would approve it, they would start building on it, and then before they went to QA, we audited it again. And then after QA was done, we would audit one more time before it shipped to production, just to make sure that any configuration changes hadn't opened up any kind of problem that we had. So what we were really trying to get at was a little bit more integration with the dev team and a little bit more handing over some of the keys so that they could move as fast as they needed to move. Does that make sense to a certain extent? You know, we're working within the security we're working within the resources that we have available and that they're able to bring on board. And moving fast was definitely a key in their CIO's mind.
And I don't think that's a problem. I think that's obviously part of the problem is too many people are using
And they're not even checking them.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. So that's where we integrated, was the security team that we had was then saying, all right, I'm going to go ahead and tell you what hub containers you're allowed to use for this amount of time. And they said, all right, great, if you can tell me what I can use, I can go ahead and ship code to those, and you're not getting in my way every single chance that I need, every time I need to build a new container. Right? Because if they're starting to build custom containers for everything, I'm going to have to audit every single one of them. And for them, that just didn't necessarily work, because we had custom builds per state. So I had 41 containers at a time.
So what happens if you say, okay, this container is good for 4 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and 4 weeks your time limit expires, and the container hasn't been updated?
That's when we'll get to that, the continuous process. But yes, there is a mechanism for re-audits and repatching at that point, right? With the way that we were working, every 2 weeks I was building new containers or allowing new containers in, because I was seeing pretty regular updates to certain containers that were built that were keeping up with the patches that I wanted to make sure were applied. So the standards were kind of something that I had to work very, very hard to get approved. We had to define the acceptable containers that were in the marketplace, define a standard OS build. Okay, so that was another thing that a lot of people were looking at the containers. Okay, but they had no baseline configuration for the host machines. Right, so we had to go ahead and set a baseline configuration, which had things like, I'm going to change the default passwords on my DRAC cards or my ILO cards. Right, I'm going to make sure that I build a very basic instance of Red Hat, and I'm not going to vary from Red Hat. And these are the things that once we had a baseline in place, I knew what I was working with as a security team. I knew what my footprint was, and I was able to work more closely with the containers, knowing that I had a standard build that I could go out and spot audit and make sure that nothing was getting changed by the ops team. Okay, and because of the way that we're deploying Docker containers, it was a very base build, so I had very little patching to do. It was basically kernel patches only at that point. I had to define the versions of the dependencies, and I have OpenSSL in here. I had a few others. but OpenSSL is probably one that's been under attack the most. So I wanted to go ahead and define what versions of these different libraries that my client was using to say, all right, this one's good, this one's not good. If you see this, we got to talk about this container again. Okay? And this was a process that I put into place so that we were able to put it into a knowledge base and people were able to make educated guesses as to when they would send me a container to be checked, whether or not I was going to approve it. Right? And this was really powerful for them. It gave them the power to say, all right, I know how to look for what I need now. Okay? I know how to find the container that's going to make my security team happy, and they were more than happy to do that. Okay? So defining these standards and then making them publicly available within the organization, and then auditing those standards regularly. You know, with Drown coming out, I got a frantic call from them. What do I do? I said, well, get ye to the patchery. But we definitely had to stop a process in place, deploy to a different container, and then start shipping those different containers. And that was what was nice about Docker, was that there was one built already that was patched, and that they could reship their code to and then get it right back into the stream. The other thing that I really like doing is auditing both my host with Linus, and there's a container plugin for Linus as well that will allow me to audit the containers that I'm putting into place. I combine that with traditional vulnerability management tools, a few of the other things that we were doing. We were doing passive vulnerability management as well. We had a firewall sitting on a monitoring port that was just constantly collecting data and looking for any kind of threat monitoring that I wasn't getting at my edge. Right? So I'm looking for things that I shouldn't be seeing. Okay? That's the kind of thing that allowed me a little bit more leeway to the dev team to say, all right, I'm watching enough here to feel like I've got an acceptable level of risk. Right? And then that audit function was make sure that we're looking at the containers at I say before they ship to production. We actually ended up putting it in place before they went to QA and then before they went to production. So if I've said a container is good, you can use this container from the hub. They build their code, they ship it to QA. Before they ship it to QA, I'm doing static code analysis, and I'm also looking at the container to make sure that there's not a configuration error. Right? And then it goes to QA, and that usually, for us, that was able to be done within a day. Right? So I'm fitting into a production cycle for them. Right? We built it right into the SDLC. Here's a day for audit before it goes to QA, and a day for audit before it goes to production. Okay? Perform regular active attacker pen tests. I want to know what I don't know. Okay? So this yep. No, that was not automated. They wanted to automate it, being DevOps. They wanted to automate everything that we did away, right? So, but I wanted to have human eyes on that because I wanted to make sure that the team was engaged, and that, you know, I still feel like the human eye is probably the best way of spotting those funny things. I don't necessarily trust everything to be automated just yet when I'm shipping to production. We are aiming to automate what happens before it goes to QA, but as of right now, I want my team looking at the code before it goes to QA just as a fire drill for when we start shipping stuff to production. Does that make sense? So they're getting more cycles. They're getting better at it every single time they do this, and they're finding more, and it's great. And then, like I said, I have SCA. I'm really focusing on privilege escalation issues, because if I can escape what the application can do from a security perspective, all of this doesn't matter, right? But with the shared kernel architecture of Docker, I really want to look for anything that could break that jail, that could get outside of my application and do some harm to the rest of my environment. Okay? I have some references here. I hurried through this because the last time I went like 48 minutes, and I knew I had a half an hour today. So I have some references here. The Red Hat blog, what's next for containers, user namespaces. That's been updated. I haven't updated the slide deck yet, but I'm going to today. The Banyan Ops one, analyzing the Docker hub. That's the second one that I referenced that had all the graphs and the container ship on fire. That's really important if you need to go to a CIO or a CISO and say, hey, I need this to work with Docker. You're putting Docker in right now, right? I need resources to manage Docker differently. That's a really powerful article to take to somebody and say, hey, look, there really are problems here, and we need to be really careful about this. All right? And then the last one, the Linux.com one, that is where I got that 451 research article from, or research quote from, that if you guys want to get more of kind of what Docker is in a nutshell than I could cover today, you can go to that, and it's a great wealth of resources. I'd also encourage you, if you're interested, to look at Michael Bolin on Twitter. He's one of the guys that created Linus and is really active with Linus, and just posted a couple really good articles on Docker security as well. It's more on the application side. If you want to get a hold of me, there's my contact info. You can find me at LinkState on Twitter, which is where I spend probably 3/4 of my day because I'm in information security. So that's where we all are. Or if you want to email me, that's my email address. Please don't spam me. But if you really want to get a hold of me and need to talk, I'm always open to an email from anybody. So I'm going to open it up to a little more Q&A. Anybody? Yep. Okay.
When you're saying that the container is moving from test to production, talking about one container?
Yep.
Okay. So I would get this perspective, DevOps traditional,
Sure.
traditional DevOps perspective, that you would build that container from scratch for each environment.
That's one of the things that Docker's trying to get around, right? That building that container from scratch, sometimes it depends on how mature your process is. Okay, if you can ensure repeatable container builds that your security team can work very, very closely with in order to audit, to allow you to build on a container that you know is going to be able to be shipped, then you're probably okay with that. What I'm seeing a lot of is that devs are really hard to hire right now. They're very expensive, and security guys are like left-handed unicorns, right? So we're getting into the resource contention issues, where building those from scratch every time, and then making sure that every single container that is audited is becoming very difficult for organizations to stomach financially. So what us being proactive auditing stuff that's available is doing is allowing those teams to focus more on deploying that code than building all of those instances, and then us having to be as involved as we were with VMs, where we're building a VM every time, and each VM has a different level of patching, and every single time I build that out, I get a different version of OpenSSH. Right? That's what we're trying to avoid here, is we're trying to set a standards, we're trying to conform to our baselines, and getting those from the hub allows us to say, all right, this is a baseline image, we're okay with this, and we're going to be able to ship this for, if you've got 41 different builds for 41 different states, you can build this 41 times, and we're happy with it for 2 to 4 weeks. Does that make sense? It's about trying to save enough money for organizations to stay agile and use the resources that they have in the best way right now. So, anybody else? Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The reason, that's why we've put kind of checkpoints into place. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's giving us the ability to work with the cycles that the devs want to run on, and not break their cycle, not break their time frames with continuous auditing type thing, where I'm continuously looking at it. If you're in an organization of that size, Docker may not necessarily be right for you for that. You know, it's focused on small DevOps teams that are, you know, it's real big in startups. So it's focused on those small teams that communicate exceptionally well and that are almost self-regulating to a certain extent. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Anybody else? I saw, yep. Right. It depends on the app. It depends on what you're working with. If you're working with apps that talk to each other quite a bit, I want something that I'm going to be able to integrate that kind of internal segmentation type firewall, where I can inspect traffic between the VMs. That a lot of what's on the marketplace right now is aimed at, and it's very helpful. If you're deploying a standalone app that you're rolling out to a website or rolling out internally to just some web users, and it's kind of smaller applet, you're probably okay with Docker. It's like I said, you got to audit, you got to analyze what you're running on it to see if it's the right tool for the job. No, not at all. It's inherently insecure. You can make it secure if you work with it really well, but it's inherently not a secure system. Anybody else? All right, thanks everybody. I did.